right, hello everybody. Last week, Chris Sherwood from Crosstalk Solutions posted a YouTube video that caused quite a stir, had a lot of resellers shaken, and there was no way I wasn't going to say that.
Good one, Mike.
The video discussed the new StirShaken laws and attestation ratings. Our own CEO, Tony Lewis, is on that video and offered his own insights. And while it was a great video, it raised some questions from many of ClearlyIP's partners. So we've taken the top questions. I've asked Tony Lewis to join us to answer them. And so Tony is our CEO and he's online with me today. These are the questions that we're going to be going over, the 6 top ones that we've received. It's kind of like, what are the responsibilities? How do we as ClearlyIP provide adherence? What can partners and resellers do? And basically pros and cons, and why is it important that you handle this now? So why don't we get started? Tony, good morning.
Morning.
So the first question is, what are the StirShaken responsibilities when it comes to a business phone system? And let's break it down. What are the customer responsibilities, reseller responsibilities, and provider responsibilities?
Okay. Well, we'll start the customer side. There's no responsibility for a customer. A customer cannot sign their own calls. There's nothing a customer can do. It's all dependent on, as per the ADIS spec for StirShaken, the originating service provider. So customers themselves can't do anything for it. They just have to use a service provider who is doing StirShaken. If we go up one level and we talk about a reseller, that would depend on how the reseller is set up. So let's take a step back on that. If a reseller is involved who's actually charging the customer, so they're the ones who are invoicing the customer every month for their voice service, and that could be for SIP trunking or for a UCAS or hosted PBX where they're charging by the user and including minutes or unlimited usage for those users. They, under the definition of the ADIS, are a service provider. So that reseller has to sign that call with their own certificate. There's some disagreements over, are they allowed to have somebody upstream from them sign it with their own certificate? Most legal people I've talked to and even different people in the industry have all stated the same thing, which is no, that doesn't actually allow them to be StirShaken compliant, because the whole point of the Trace Act, which is what StirShaken's for, is to be able to trace back to the originating service provider who placed that call on the network, which would be the reseller in that situation. Now, if you have a reseller involved, I use the word reseller lightly, who isn't charging the end customer, but they're getting a commission back from the service provider, a lot of times it's called an agent model. In that situation, no, they don't need their own certificate because they're not the ones who are charging the customer. Whoever they're getting their commission from is the one who's charging the customer. They're the ones that have to have their own certificate to sign calls.
Excellent. Okay. And then the provider responsibilities, like what we're doing, that's really where that comes into play, is we're responsible.
As we talked about, the originating service provider. So whoever is originating that call onto the network, working with the end customer, is who's responsible to sign that call.
Perfect. Next question was, how does ClearlyIP provide adherence to the new StirShaken guidelines?
So we do it because we, of course, have our own certificate and we sign all of our calls, and we sign them with an A, B, or a C, depending on how that call is being placed to us. Really don't sign much with a C because our business is not international business or an intermediate provider. So most of our calls get signed with an A or a B, depending on the caller ID and what we can attest to on that call.
Right, and that's our attestation service. And we'll put a link to that at the end of this video.
Oh, you're referring to where people can call in and see what
exactly
we receive. That's not us signing the call. That's just what their carrier is signing the call when they send it to us, just as a way for them to verify what their carrier is doing.
Perfect. Good clarification on that. Next question, what can partners and resellers do for their existing systems, those which they've received a discounted trunking service from us?
Okay, so if they're an actual reseller, where we're giving them wholesale pricing up front and they're charging their end customer, then technically they're supposed to be signing those calls, which means they have to go through the process of getting their own certificate. So they have to become a 499 USF 499 filer. They have to go get their own OCN number. Then they have to go to iConnective and get a token, and then go partner with a certificate authority, a CA, to get a certificate issued. Now, once they do all that, they now have to sign those calls. So today, that would mean they have to have an SBC in place or use some way through their PBX to sign calls. We are working on a product for our partners that will let them provide their cert to us, and we will sign all of the calls from their customers who belong to them. We will sign all those calls with their own cert. So it's a service we're working on. It'll be out shortly. If we have any partners who already have their cert and want to reach out to us and be one of our testing resellers, reach out to sales and we can get them on the list. But it will be coming out soon that we will allow partners to sign. We'll use their certificate to sign any calls from any of their customers for them.
Excellent. All right. So can partner locations be moved from discounted to an agent location?
Okay, so for those partners who don't want to go through all the work of becoming a 499 filer, or maybe they are, but they don't want to get an OCN, they don't want to spend the money to get the OCN, spend the money to get a token, spend the money to get a cert, and all the steps involved for that. We can work with them to move them into our agent model, where we take over billing the end customer and all the taxation and all the compliance, and then we pay them a monthly commission evergreen on those customers forever, and move them away from us billing the reseller to us billing the end customer, working with the customer to get all their billing information. We've done this dozens of times with partners over the last few months. Not a big deal for us to do. Just reach out to sales. We'll be happy to have that discussion.
All right. And what are the pros and cons of just leaving the service alone, just leaving it as it is?
The pros are you put your head in the sand and you ignore everything. The cons are the FCC is coming down on people. They're sending out letters on a weekly basis. I haven't heard of anyone being fined yet, but they're being nice and trying to get people in compliance. But you're not going to be able to ignore this. You got to come in compliance. Either you got to go get your own certificate and work with us or a carrier to load that cert and sign your calls for you, or you've got to switch to an agent program. You're not going to be able to just ignore it.
Okay. And that kind of
the biggest reason you won't be able to ignore it is, part of the FCC's mandate with the Trace Act is every reseller has to be registered in the robocall mitigation database, and we as a service provider have to verify they're there before we're allowed to do business with them. And part of the enrolling into the robocall mitigation database is attesting to your StirShaken level. So if you say, I have no StirShaken, they're going to reach out to you and say you have to have it. The FCC has. If you say you have full StirShaken, but you don't have a certificate ever issued to you or a token ever issued to you, I should say not a certificate, but a token by iConnective, they're going to reach out to you saying you're lying on your application. So you're kind of caught in between now, where you as a reseller, we as a service provider have to make sure you're in the robocall mitigation database. And then that's flagging, once you go into that database, that's flagging the FCC to see, are you actually compliant with StirShaken or not? So you're not going to be able to avoid it much longer.
Okay, excellent. And that kind of covered why it was important to handle this right now. Is there any other, tips that you would give out, or anything else you want to add to the end of this?
I mean, I would say, it's scary. There's a lot of steps involved to go get your certificate. And if you're not a 499 filer, meaning you are not collecting and remitting USF, that's the first step you have to do. And technically, you were supposed to be doing that all along. Anybody who charges an end user is supposed to be collecting USF. Now, there's the whole diminish clause, which is if you're under $10,000 in USF taxes, you don't have to pay it in until you get to there. But that doesn't mean you're not supposed to be collecting it. And that doesn't mean you don't have a 499 filer ID. And that doesn't mean you don't file a yearly report with the FCC on what your total USF was. You still have to do all those things. Even if you only got 5 customers that you're charging, voice services for, you are technically under the FCC guidelines, a voice over IP reseller. You have to be collecting $499. taxes, all your USF recovery fees, or not recovery, your USF fees, that fund all this broadband initiative that the government's been giving out all that money for, and help build out the whole telecom network that exists in this country, and the internet network was all funded through, not all, but a lot of it funded through USF fees,
Great.
the universal
Excellent.
service fees.
Well, I appreciate your time. I hope that that our resellers and partners have found this useful, and just like to thank you for taking the time to view this video. If you have additional questions, please don't hesitate to reach out.